morning, NTA students and a few of your staff. We have the pleasure and delight to welcome an amazing guest speaker with us today, Alice Bentinck. She was rated one of 50 most inspiring women in Eurotech. She's also the co-founder of two amazing organizations, Entrepreneur First and Code First Girls. Entrepreneur First is an organization which supports university graduates from computer science and engineering backgrounds with the startup funds. However, when this was created, herself and her co-founder realized that it was predominantly males who applied. So they started Code First Girls, which is a non-profit organization which allows university graduate females to transition from art sectors into technology sectors. So like I said, we are completely privileged and honored to actually have her here with us. So let's give an amazing and a warm welcome to Alice Bentinck.
Well, good morning everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to speak to all of you. I thought before kicking off into talking about startups, I'd just give a little bit of context. Got some funky PowerPoint stuff. Give a little bit of context as to who I am. So it was some time ago that I was at the stage that you guys are at, where you're beginning to think about your A-levels, beginning to get stuck into your A-levels. I thought I'd give you an idea of how I got from doing my A-levels to where I am now. So I've just turned 30, so in 10 years' time, this is where the sort of thing that you guys could be doing. So when I left school, I'd done non-technical A-levels, so I'd done geography, history and business studies. And I thought that I'd always wanted to do something in business, so I decided to do a business degree at the University of Nottingham. And when I was at Nottingham, I got involved in something called Enactus, which is a student society that helps support social enterprises and create social enterprises within the local community. So began to get really interested in this idea of creating small micro businesses, small businesses, and particularly thinking about how you can create small businesses that help other people while also producing fantastic goods and services. When I left university, I briefly worked for Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister, just when he'd left office. And so that was a really interesting insight into what does someone who's at the very peak of their career, the very sort of pinnacle of their career, what does that look like and feel like? And I think in terms of learning about leadership, for me, that was a really transformative experience. I then went and took a typical graduate job. So I went and joined a management consultancy called McKinsey. And strategy consultants, broadly what they do is they help big companies solve big problems. So it's about how do you sell more products, how do you fire people, how do you make sure your organization runs as efficiently as possible. And that was interesting, and that was a very hard job. It's very, very challenging. You work really long hours. But it wasn't really enough. It wasn't particularly creative. You're basically going through an efficiency process, so you're trying to sell more or reduce costs, but it wasn't really about creating anything from new. And my experience while I was at university working with small social enterprises made me really think about going into startups and particularly going into tech as well. Now, I think you're at a really lucky period in history where, for me, I can say to people of my generation, tech is changing everything. You know, it changes the way that we buy stuff, changes the way that we communicate with each other, it changes the way that we fall in love, that we give to charity. It really has changed the fabric of society and the way that work and jobs are functioning. But I say that to my generation, they go, yes, that's true, actually, things really are changing. Say that to you, and you probably think, well, of course, this is the status quo, this is the way it's always been. Your generation is often called digital natives, and that means that you have a real advantage over my generation and previous generations, because for you, this is normal. The fact that technology is part of the fabric of life is really, really normal. But I think when you look at people's career expectations, when you look at the kind of careers people look at, whether it be management consultancy or accountancy or engineering or law or medicine, they're still reasonably traditional careers, even though the world of work has completely changed. One of the big changes that technology has created is that it's now never been easier to start your own company. So previously, say 10 years ago, if you wanted to start your own company, you would probably have to have a lot of money. You would need to be able to buy stock. You would need to be able to pay for a place for your business to be located. Even if it was a technology company, you would have to pay for servers. It was reasonably expensive, and that meant that there was a real barrier to people starting their own startups. But over the last decade, technology has made it easier and easier and cheaper to build a startup that not only can get off the ground, but that can impact hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, basically from your bedroom. So what I wanted to walk through today was how do you go through that process of starting your own company? What do you need to think about? I'm going to use a couple of examples to show you some of the people that have been through Entrepreneur First, and talk a little bit about some of the skills that you will need to be able to do that yourselves. So Entrepreneur First, we're a company builder. So when I left McKinsey, I left with one of my colleagues, and we went and set up our own company called Entrepreneur First. And it felt really, really risky. I'd just been offered a job at Google, and everyone was like, oh, think of the free food, it'll be amazing. And I couldn't get quite excited enough about the free food. So I turned down the offer to go to Google and set up my own company instead. And of course, it was scary. My parents weren't particularly sure about that and didn't necessarily think it was a good idea. But I've never looked back since. So what EF does, what Entrepreneur First does, is we take individuals, often from computer science degrees, engineering degrees, technical degrees, and we help them build their own startups from scratch. So over the last 5 years, we've built more than 100 startups that are now valued at more than $450 million. So these are really valuable companies that are built by people often just out of university. So they're often in their early 20s, so they're not that far away from where you are in your careers now. So these are people who are just slightly ahead of you. How many of you have thought about building your own startup one day? A couple of hands? Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose the thing to say to you now is probably the easiest time for you to build a startup. You're probably living at home. You probably don't have to worry too much about your living costs. You don't have necessarily a mortgage or a family or anything like that to worry about. So now is probably one of the lowest risk times for you to start building startups and to start developing the skills that you need to potentially have a startup career in the future. And there's no reason why you can't get started straight away, as in later on this afternoon, start thinking about this and get going. The skills that you will learn from building your own startup will not only make it easier for you in the future to build a startup, but will also make you more employable. So enterprise and entrepreneurial skills have never been more valuable. Most employers are looking for people who are proactive, determined, resilient, technical, and a lot of those skills come from going through an entrepreneurial and startup process. I think the really, really hard thing with starting a startup is to get started. It feels like there's so much that you need to have in place, whether it be cash, whether it be network, whether it be skills. But actually, the best way to learn how to start to build a startup is to just get going. So we're going to walk through that process and use an example to help you understand what you need to do. So first of all, you need to come up with an idea. And I think this is one of the pieces that we really see individuals struggle with. You know, what is the perfect idea? I can't get going until I have the absolute perfect idea. Unless it's the right idea, what's the point? But there is no such thing as the right idea or the perfect idea. The only way to understand if you have a good idea is to start getting it out there and testing it. So whatever ideas you may have at the moment, it's probably just a good place to start. It doesn't matter if it's a good or bad idea. If you don't have an idea yet, the way to think about an idea is to think about, what do you know about? What do you know about that you could use as an asset? So what knowledge do you have that you could use as an asset to build a startup? Is there a problem that you experience every day? Is there an opportunity that you can see in your school or in your college? Is there an opportunity that you can see within your communities and within your families? It's likely that day to day you're experiencing different problems and different opportunities that could turn into a startup. I'm going to talk you through the example of Clotho. So this is one of the startups that came through Entrepreneur First a couple of years ago. The problem that they wanted to solve, or the thing that they'd noticed, was that lots of girls, lots of young women, and they noticed this while they were at university at Imperial College, lots of young women have tons of clothes in their wardrobe that they just don't use. So they have bags of old clothes that maybe they haven't worn for a while, but they just don't want to get rid of. They don't necessarily want to throw them away or give them to the charity shop. So the two founders of this startup were Caroline and Vivian, and they were both chemistry undergraduates at Imperial College. So their degree didn't necessarily link with their startup, but I'll come back to that in just a moment. But the most important thing was they found each other to work with. Building a startup is really, really hard. So they'd identified this problem, but they also needed each other to work with. They needed a co-founder. So this is Caroline and Vivian. If you look at most startups, most of the big successful startups, so if you look at Microsoft, if you look at Google, if you look at Facebook, the press often talks about one person, one leader. You know, Apple, Steve Jobs is always seen as the leader of the organization. But if you look into how the companies are formed, there's usually two, if not more, co-founders behind that organization making it happen. So as you're thinking about going on your startup journey, who can you work with? What friend do you have? What family member do you have? What person do you work with outside of school that you could work with as a co-founder? Somebody who has the right skills that are complementary to yours. So maybe if you're particularly good at selling, maybe they're more technical and good at building products. Or maybe if you have a particular area of knowledge in one place, you want to find someone who has some extra knowledge that could further the business. But make sure you find someone to work with. You need a co-founder. Has anyone read The Lean Startup or heard of The Lean Startup as a concept? Broadly, when you look at how startups were produced 5 years ago, it was you would build something and then you would see if people wanted it. So there is a very famous example of this happening. So in the first wave of the internet, there was a company called Webvan. And Webvan was basically food delivery, grocery delivery in America. And what Webvan did was they said, we know that people want to buy food online. Why go to the supermarket when you can buy food online? So they raised $9 billion. It was one of the largest ever fundraisers. They raised $9 billion and built a network across America of delivery vans, warehouses, call centers. They built up this massive business that had about 3,000 employees. And then they went live. And they put the site up and they waited for people to come and buy stuff through their website. Nothing happened. People didn't buy stuff through the website. It was too early. So this is back in the early 2000s when people didn't necessarily want to put their credit card details online. So nothing happened. And that business pretty much overnight collapsed. What this led to was an idea called the Lean Startup Movement, which says whenever you have an idea, you don't know if it's a good idea or not, but the only way to do that is to test. So to test that idea with customers. So it can be very easy, and you often hear people say, oh, I can't tell you my idea, you'll steal it. Or I don't want to share my idea with anyone, they'll copy it. The most important thing you can do once you have your idea and once you have your co-founder is to share that idea with as many people as possible and to get feedback on it. So you can then iterate on that idea and improve it. So the idea for Clotho was that there's this problem where young women have lots of clothes that they don't use. How can we encourage young women to swap clothes with each other so that they can access new wardrobes, but also make a little bit of money on the side? Now, you could say the way that they should do this is they need a website. They need a fully functioning payment process. They need people who are employed to go and pick up the clothes from various universities so that they can bring them centrally so that they can be swapped. But actually, that's really expensive. And if you don't know if your idea is any good yet, it's a bad idea to invest that money and time into building that. So instead, what Caroline and Vivian did was they pretended that the platform existed. So instead of saying, we have this piece of technology that will make this work, they did it all by hand. So they ran around themselves, picking up clothes from one girl, taking it to another girl, exchanging the cash between the girls as well. So they were able to test the idea and see if anyone wanted it without actually having to spend any money. They were just spending their time. So very, very quickly, they could see if the idea was going to work. And they used the feedback to try and get to improve the idea. They ran some events. So instead of having an online platform where people swapped clothes, they did it in person at events in London, and actually got people together, and were able to talk to their customers and get feedback on their idea and really begin building those relationships with their customers. Once they knew that people wanted their product, they were then able to build it. And there are tons of really easy and cheap and quick ways to build a technology product these days. So how many people can code currently? Can anyone code little bits? Clotho were able to make this website. So it's a website where you can sell, you can transact, you can take money within a couple of hours. So by using platforms like Shopify, WordPress, Weebly, Squarespace, these platforms allow you to build a website really quickly, often for free. That means that you can start selling your product, start interacting with customers pretty much from the very beginning. So it means that instead of having to build the platform yourself, instead of having to employ developers, you can actually test your idea as soon as possible. So whatever you're thinking of doing, whatever your idea may be, whether it's about swapping clothes or whether it's about selling a product that you've created yourself, there are really easy ways to get your product online and get your startup online and reaching a bigger audience. Social media as well, so using Facebook and Snapchat and Twitter to get your message out there and make sure that you're interacting with as many people as possible. These are the kind of platforms that you know best, and particularly if your customer is a person like you know how to reach them. And actually, you probably know how to reach them better than somebody who's 10 or 15 years older than you and who has more experience. You know, that's really your advantage, that you're part of this generation that knows how to use these social media platforms to your advantage. And then it's selling your product. So getting people transacting, getting people to use the product online. So if you look at what Clotho did, where they had these events in person, they were able to build up the initial trust with their first customers so that they then felt happy to transact online. So within a matter of weeks, Clotho was able to build up a customer base, build up their product, and test whether anyone wanted it. So this is something that you can do very, very quickly while you're still at college and while you're still studying. There's no risk, there's no downside. It won't cost you anything. Potentially you could make some money from it. You'll learn lots and lots of skills from it, whether it's about selling, whether it's about idea development. But most importantly, it will hopefully open your mind to what a creative, what a steep learning curve, and how interesting entrepreneurship can be. Now, the kind of companies that we produce at Entrepreneur First sometimes are like Clotho, but they're often much more deeply technical. So when you're going through university and making your university choices, the kind of people who build the startups that I'm about to talk about typically have computer science or engineering backgrounds. Two of our biggest startups, so first one is called Magic Pony Technology. It's a terrible name, but it's a very good company. So this company was built by two graduates from Imperial College. Rob had just finished his undergraduate degree, and Zihan had finished his PhD in visual processing. Rob's undergrad was in electrical engineering. The problem that they started working on was on video compression. So they realized that there was this problem that as social media platforms grow, as people send more and more videos and more photos to each other, the bandwidth for the carriers is getting exhausted. There's too much going through that bandwidth. So they wanted to better compress the files that are being transferred. They both had technical backgrounds and were able to build this product themselves. The reason this company is so interesting, though, is in a very short amount of time, they were able to create a lot of value. So this company, 18 months after it was started, was sold to Twitter for $150 million. So the company was sold. There are only 14 people in the company at that stage. So Rob and Zihan, as the founders, had recruited people to join them in their company, and the company was bought by Twitter. Rob is now based in San Francisco, and Zihan's still based in London building the product. But these guys didn't necessarily ever think that they would be founders of startups. You know, they had very strong academic backgrounds. They'd always been, sort of top of their year. They could have done any job they wanted. But they knew they wanted to do something creative. They knew they wanted to solve a big problem. And so they did that through building a startup themselves. They've also ended up making a lot of money, as you can imagine. Another example is Avocarrot. Avocarrot was built by George and 3 of his friends. They were actually all from Cyprus and had been through the Cypriot military service together. And the company they founded, Avocarrot, was enabled people who made apps to sell things through their apps. This company was sold for $20 million earlier on this year. Now, George also was from Imperial, from a computer science background this time. We don't just take people from Imperial, from a computer science background. And again, he could have and had multiple job offers to work as a developer within a startup. But instead, he took the risk and he took the opportunity to become a founder. So I suppose one of the things that I would encourage you to think about, if you do think that building a startup could be for you, is to think about how can you make sure that technology is a fundamental part of your startup. It means you can reach more people, it means it's cheaper and quicker to build. So to think about how you can learn to code. There's tons of different ways that you can learn while you're still at college. There's free resources like Code Academy. There's Code First Girls, which is the organisation I set up, which teaches women to code for free. But there's no reason why you can't get started in your spare time. Very quickly, you'll be able to build your own websites, but also your own pieces of software. And you should think about whether doing something like computer science could be a good fit for you when you're at university. Entrepreneurial skills really can fast-track your career. It either means that you can build a really big company and at a very young age be managing lots of people and taking on far more responsibility than you would in any other job. It also means that even if things go wrong, you will have learned the skills that will make you more employable and will build out your CV and make sure that you can have a glittering career in other ways. Entrepreneurialism is still, and being a founder, being a startup founder, is still an unusual career path, but it's definitely one that is open to all of you. There are no barriers to being a founder, and there's no application process to being a founder. It's something that all of you can do right now, and I would encourage you to think about that. So I hope that some of you will get started. I hope that some of you will think about what you can do today and over the next couple of weeks, months and years. Think about what you can do to get started, build your entrepreneurial skills, and hopefully end up founding your own startup.